Hello. What we're going to work on right now is gender stratification, and it's the last of the 3 stratification chapters. And again, the ideas that you learned in the first couple of videos all apply here as well. Now, if you remember, we said that gender is going to be the personal traits and social positions that members of a society attach to being a male or a female. And so that's about gender. So gender stratification is the unequal distribution of wealth, power, and privilege between men and women. And it's an issue not just in the United States, it's a global issue as well. And so on your handout, those 2 definitions are written there for you. And as we start to talk about gender, you want to remember that it's not always based on biology. If we're talking about hunting and gathering societies, yes, men were more likely to be the hunters because they were not pregnant or carrying babies or nursing babies or carrying infants and toddlers. And so they physically were built in a way that was more advantageous to cover large ground, to kill big animals, and to do the heavy lifting. Whereas women's bodies were designed, obviously, and needed to be a little farther behind, taking care of those children. And so men were the hunters, women were the gatherers. But other than that physical distribution, that does not mean that a society has to decide what the jobs are based on being male or female. And in your book, you're going to read about Margaret Mead, a very, very famous anthropologist who studied in the Pacific and found that there were different cultures there who assigned jobs and tasks within the society that in one culture might have been what a female would do, but in that culture a male would do. And that dads can be perfectly good parents and very adequate. It's not just moms who provide good parenting. And so she helped us to understand, and of course the research of other people as well, that gender was something that your culture decided for you. When I was a little girl in 1st grade, I remember reading readers about Dick and Jane. And Dick was always outside doing stuff with his dad, and Jane was always in the house helping her mom with the housework. And I can remember as a small child thinking, well, how come Jane doesn't get to go outside and have some fun? And so it was very gender biased in terms of teaching you this is what a boy should be, this is what a girl should be. And of course now we've come a very long way, but we find that there's still a lot of gender bias that goes on in the world around us, whether it's through advertising, the media, what's going on in the social internet, websites, for example. We know that there's a huge impact that still happens all around us all the time. Now, in a society, you can have more of a patriarchal society or a matriarchal. A patriarchal society is one where men have more money, status, and power and control, whereas in a matriarchal society, women have more money, status, power, and control. And we do even have some Native American tribes in this country, one being the Onondaga in upstate New York that still exists today. And the women choose the tribal leaders and the chief, and then they decide whether or not they're doing a good job and have a tremendous say-so in how that tribe is run. They're also matrilinear, meaning that when a guy and a girl get married, he joins her family line. Typically what we see in patriarchal societies is where she joins his family, and in fact in places like India, that daughter-in-law is often treated like a slave by her mother-in-law for many, many years and has to be extremely subservient to her in part of some of the old cultural beliefs, for example. So it can be very powerful. Now, the term sexism is next on your paper, and sexism is the belief that somehow one gender is better than another just by virtue of what it is. So if you are a male and you're sexist, you believe that you're better than women and that men can do the job better than women. Or maybe you believe that only mothering can be done, or parenting can only be done by a mother. So sexism is when you're using that element of that person's sex or gender as a way to define that job or the payment for that job or the ability to do that job, and it's clearly irrational and not very logical. And so the reality is that sexism is part of a belief system. And anytime you see an ism, you can bet that it's based on a form of prejudice and can have discrimination where you act on that belief system. So I know when I was coming up, in the beginning of my career, way back in the days of the late 70s, I was hired by Herkimer County Community College. And I was fresh out of grad school, and I was going to teach psychology. And the vice president looked at me and said, well, it doesn't matter how good a job you do because we're only going to keep you here for a year to 2 years. To which I naively say, well, why? If I'm doing a good job, why wouldn't you keep me? To which he said, well, in order to meet affirmative action guidelines, we have to show that we're hiring women and minorities, so we let women go every couple of years so we can hire a new woman so it looks good on the books. And so it had nothing to do with my skill set or competency or performance. It was about the fact that they had to look like they were hiring a girl, and I was the only one in all of the social sciences department, and I did do a very good job, thank you very much, and then transferred to another community college, and they had let their female go, and so she went to another college. So we all sort of traded positions very early on in my career, and it was really fascinating to realize that even though we had a job, we're teaching at a community college and a college, it was still a minority of women who were doing it. And of course now over half of my social sciences department are female, and I've been chair of the department, had been chair for like 15 years, and so it's a very different world. But it really is still quite amazing to me sometimes when I still see sexism in terms of pay scale or pay rate, or having somebody say, well, little lady, you don't have to worry about that. And I'm thinking, yes, I do. It might be everything from someone who's selling me a set of tires to buying a car, where they say to me, and have said to me, well, why don't you have your husband come in and talk to us? He'll know what to do. And thinking, I'm the one buying the car. I'm the one who did the research. I already know what I want. And it still happens even today. And so it's not something that's completely gone, and it's something we need to pay attention to, especially since so many people who make laws right now are men about women, and we still, ladies, do not have equal pay or equal rights under the law. So we need to be mindful that we may be over 50% of the population, but we are still treated as a minority when you look at the actual rights and privileges. And when women have equal pay, then we can talk about equality. Now, in order to make that point about why do women make less and do we make less, on your paper I've posted the median income for 2019 from the census. And if you look at it, you'll see that men with a bachelor's median, remember median is the one's income in the middle, the median income for men is $63,269. For women, and that's with a bachelor's, for women it's only $41,045. For a master's, for men, it's $80,000. For a woman, it's $55,000. For a PhD for a male, it's $101,000, and for women, only $72,000. Now, that is unbelievable, because in 2015, the median income for a woman working full-time was $40,742, and for men, it was $51,212. And I listed some stuff here for you at the bottom of the paper that talks about the Bureau of Labor and Statistics reported that in 2013, female full-time workers had median weekly incomes of $706 compared to men's $860. Women aged 35 years and older earn 74 to 80% of the earnings of their male counterparts. I also listed some more recent figures from 2018 to show you the difference. Median weekly earnings were $783 for women, so we did go up about 70-something bucks, and $965 for men. Median weekly earnings of the nation's 113.4 million full-time wage and salary workers was $881. So I just want to give you some more current figures to show you that, ladies, we are still not making as much as men. And if you turn the page, you'll see that I gave you a website to go to. You can look that up for extra credit if you like and write a paragraph about what you find at that government website telling you about what's going on. So the question would be, why are women making less? And gentlemen, this does apply to you, because someday you may have a daughter that you send to UNC Chapel Hill and you've paid all this money for her tuition, and she graduates and she gets a job at much less than a guy who went through the same program, and maybe she had better grades. And so even though men may not think this applies to them, your wives, your moms, your daughters, your aunts, whatever, they're going to be impacted by this, and you have to step up and help in the fight, because this cannot be just a woman's issue. So when we look at why some of these things may happen, your book talks about the fact that the bulk of the family responsibility for many people in a family falls on the mom, and that the roles and responsibilities to a great extent fall on her shoulders. And there's this very famous description of what they call the 4 shifts. And the first shift for a woman is when she goes to work. The second shift is when she comes home and does all the work that she has to do for her family so that they function. Third shift in a day would be when you get to sit down, relax, and fourth shift is when you're sleeping. And what we know from research is that women have this incredible second shift, that when they get home, many women are working another full-time job taking care of their families. Now, that's not to say that men don't help out, but the reality is that couples who say they want to be 50-50, as soon as the first baby shows up, the workload divides and she starts taking more on. We also know that women's, because of the culture we're raised in, often feel more responsible for the cleanliness and the organization and the development of their home. And women are often very hard on other women in terms of, oh, she doesn't keep a very clean house, or, she's not very organized. Instead of saying, well, how is she delegating this out to her husband and her kids so that they are stepping up and doing part of this? We as women are often taught that we're in charge of this. This is an important part of our self-esteem and our ego, how our family is run, how we're taking care of them. And so we often think we have to do it all and be super women, and that just doesn't work real well, especially when so many more women, over 50% of the population, well over 50% are working and providing for their families. And in a number of homes, these women are the primary breadwinners. So it's even more important that they have help when they get home. But a lot of women either don't get that help, don't get that support, don't ask for that help. And sadly, sometimes women only find out how valuable they are until after they die. Because if your wife is killed in a car accident and the husband goes to the insurance company and says, hey, what's the story here? Well, they're going to have to replace not only her salary of what she would make for the family, but the cost of childcare, the cost of cleaning, cooking, taking care of this family. All the other things that she does is kind of factored in at that point in terms of a settlement, which is really kind of remarkable. And of course, we do have Mother's Day. We do have one whole day a year when we recognize the work that moms do. And so hopefully you'll celebrate that a little more often in your family. And that's not to leave dads out, but historically, men did not do as much work around the house. The newest generation of men do more, but it's still not 50-50, guys. So we need to have you step up. So family responsibilities are really important. Women do on the average of 16.2 hours to men's 9.4 over a period of several days. Now in schooling, we find that even in early schooling, through middle school, through high school, and even into the college years, we do find there's still a lot of discrepancies. Girls are often rewarded when they're little in school for being good and passive and being a good girl, whereas boys are often given more recognition for speaking up, being a leader, taking the initiative. And so it's something where boys get a different type of praise as compared to girls, although we certainly are doing a better job encouraging girls to go into look at different fields like science and math and engineering or whatever. But we still tend to still consciously or subconsciously send these social messages of where it would be appropriate, for a girl to have a job or a career, or where she would be more acceptable. I know I'm always amazed at the college when I look at the girls who are in the engineering program, of which there are practically nil, but they're in the math classes, the upper math classes. And at the beginning of the semester, I might see 5 girls in that class, and by the end of the semester, there might be 1 or 2. And sometimes when I talk to these girls over the years about why did you drop it, it's hard to be one of the few girls in there. The boys make fun of you all the time. It doesn't seem like I'll have much of an opportunity for a career. We have to find ways to change those attitudes. And of course, NC State is very aggressive in having a middle school program every summer where girls go essentially to a computer camp or a math science camp to encourage them, because girls can do this. It's just that girls learn in a different way. Girls learn better math and science in a more collaborative, inclusive setting, whereas boys tend to learn better in more of an instructional, kind of straight-on, one-to-one. So it's just different ways that people learn, different pressures that are in it. I had a niece not that many years ago who took a 6-week engineering, it was like a little mini course in her middle school, and you could take it for 6 weeks. She was the only girl in the engineering class, and they had to build a bridge out of popsicle sticks. And she thoroughly enjoyed it and had a wonderful time, and actually went from there into a career of nursing because she loved the science of it as well as taking, and actually she loves that more than taking care of people per se. But that engineering class really turned her on to math and science and technology and microbiology and all sorts of things. And yet she was the only girl, and she said the hardest part was being made fun of by the boys. But at the end, when she built a really good bridge out of those popsicle sticks, she earned their respect. So it's something where we still send a lot of messages. The other thing that's a huge influence here besides school is that girls rely more heavily on social media by middle school, and they're more connected to the like-dislike sorts of stuff, whereas boys are engaged more in their video games longer and do not look to the internet for their self-esteem and approval as much as girls do. But that pressure, that social pressure that we find in the media to be cute, attractive, desirable, to be liked, not to be too smart, boys won't like you if you're too smart. Believe it or not, a lot of those ideas still exist today and really influence what happens to kids. But certainly schooling is important. Now, more girls finish college, community college, four-year college, for example, as compared to boys, but the main difference is that girls tend to take educational areas like teaching in healthcare or whatever, whereas boys are more in math, science, technology, and those are the ones that pay more over the long run. So more women are getting their degrees, but they're not getting it in areas that are as valued by society. So that is a problem. You've also got politics. They talk a little bit more about this being the year of the women, that this current year in Congress, in the House and the Senate, we have more women than ever before, especially in the Congress itself and in the House of Representatives. But again, ladies, we're 50% of the population, but we are not 50% in terms of representation. And as a result, many men are making decisions about our money, our lives, our bodies, and we don't have as much of a say on that floor in the House and the Senate to say what's important to us for us. And so we really need to pick that up. But a problem is that women have more trouble getting funding for their political campaigns. They're often judged by who they're married to or who they're related to in terms of politics. We're much harsher with women. Women walk a much finer line, that if she sounds more assertive, she's perceived as aggressive, pushing, and being a witch, whereas he might be saying the exact same thing, a male candidate, but he is seen as a leader and more assertive and, has this leadership potential. We're much, much harder on women, and that's true for women on women in politics as well. And so whether or not we'll be ready to have a women candidate, we'll have to wait and see what happens in the next round of campaigning. There's no more woman in a presidential position, but Mr. Biden has said that he will have a woman on his ticket. And so it'll be interesting to see if that happens. We have had it happen before, but those candidates lost, obviously, for many other reasons, not because there was a woman on the ticket. More women, for example, about 23% of women are in seats of legislatures and parliaments around the world, and so again, we need to pick up the pace. Although in some countries, women do have very high leadership positions. When we went to Great Britain with our students, the British folks teased us and challenged us about, how come you don't have an American female president? And why don't you want women in power? And of course, our students were like, well, how come you do? And they said, well, because we have queens, and we've had very powerful queens who've led the nations through times of great trouble and trauma. And so we're used to having women in some role of leadership, so we're not as upset about that. And so it's very interesting to see how the dynamics of your country play a part in terms of what you recognize or what you think a woman can do. We still don't have a lot of women in heads of companies and businesses and in boardrooms. We're still a minority, and women still have to try to break through that glass ceiling that is talked about in the bureaucracy chapter. That is still very, very real for women and minorities today. Then your book talks about the impact of mass media, which should be pretty obvious as you read it. And then they talk about work, occupation, income, and wealth. And again, we don't make as much money. And just recently, there's a whole new movement happening talking about parity on jobs. And what this means is, if a man and a woman are applying for a job, I'd say the job is between 30 and 35,000, and they both have the same qualifications, and they offer them the job. They'll often offer the woman 30, and she'll say, thank you. They'll offer the guy 30, and he'll say, well, if the range is 35, how come I'm not making 35? So men are much more likely to negotiate for that better, amount of money, and so they start higher and keep going up higher every time there's a raise. women are often afraid to negotiate, and which is why we pay $1,000 more on the average for a car. We pay more for our dry cleaning. We pay more for our clothes in stores. We don't negotiate. We don't know our value, and we don't want to look like we're being bossy or aggressive or mean. And even the Girl Scouts had a program last year with the word bossy on like a pin with a red line through it, essentially saying that if I'm a little girl and I'm a leader, that doesn't mean I'm bossy. It means that I have leadership potential. And so we've got to find a way to label some of these things so that they become more acceptable for girls, so that they see that potential in what they can be and who they are. Then you've got, in terms of parity, back to the salary thing. So men are going to come out higher typically when they're both offered the job. Now, on a job application, they often say, what did you make at your last job? Well, if that last job paid a woman less because of job discrimination, but he got paid more, they will only offer her a little bit more, figuring, okay, she's going to like this salary, but they'll offer him more, and again, because it was based on a higher salary. So some recent court decisions have come down saying, whoa. If you're going to offer a job at $35,000, you shouldn't be asking what they made in their prior job. That has no relevance because that job salary may have been based on discriminatory policies. And so if the job is 35, it's 35, period. And so we'll see if that eventually becomes law in more states, but it's something where there's a new recognition for the importance of parity, not basing your salary based on your old salary, which may have come from a very prejudiced environment where there was sexism. So we'll see if that's going to work, okay? Other things that can make a job, obviously more women are in the lower service sector and those pink-collar jobs. More women start at the bottom rungs as compared to men and have a harder time moving up through the ranks of an organization, and that men move up much more quickly. We know that there is more discrimination against women. We know that there's more sexism on the job and sexual harassment. Now, that doesn't mean a woman can't harass a man. She can. But the bulk of harassment is going to be from men who have more money, status, and power towards the women. And so we're seeing that. We also have things that help women, like mommy tracks and job sharing. Job sharing is where two women share that job as a bank teller, and they each work 2.5 days a week, and that works out well for their babysitting and wanting to spend time with their family. And a mommy track, for example, is where, say you work for a law office, and they want you to work 80 hours a week. You're a mom, you want to, say, work 60 hours a week. They may come to you and say, we'll offer you all these benefits, and you'll get to keep your job, but you'll never become partner because you can't put in that same amount of time as somebody else in the office, typically a man. And so that may be the job that she wants, 60 hours a week, great pay, benefits, and she still has time for her family. And so that's called more of a mommy track. It's understood that that recognition, to have that time with your family, it may not get you promoted the same way, but at least you get to have some job security. Your next part in the book talks about the military, and obviously women have always been a part of the military, just not recognized by the military or brought in for more formal training, but that's happening obviously more and more, and women are doing well. The scary part is that in some parts of the military, there have been studies done that show that many of the men, especially like at the Air Force Academy, was done several years ago, where 25% of the men there thought that women shouldn't be there. And of course, we've had a very high rate of rape and assault that have happened to women and to some men as well. And Kirsten Gillibrand, one of the senators from New York State, has been working very hard on this, trying to get the rules changed in the military so that people can step forward when they've been assaulted and not be forced to stay in the same unit with someone who obviously has hurt them in some way. So, but overall, women serve in the military and do extremely well. And women are now moving more into areas of combat than ever before. I remember years ago they'd say, oh, a girl can't fly a plane or a helicopter, and then they did. Women can't be in battle, and they are. Women can't be on the front line. Oh, yes, they can, and do an excellent job. So it's really important that we allow all people, male and female, gay, straight, trans, whatever, their opportunities to serve their nation as patriots. And so that's important. Now, your book talks a little bit about the intersection theory, and the intersection theory says that essentially that if you take 2, 3, 4 variables about a person, so say you have somebody who is African American, and they're poor, and they're gay, and whatever. So what happens is you have all these variables crisscross each other. And if too many of them crisscross, that can create tremendous barriers for that person in our society, depending on the prejudices that are out there and the stereotypes that are out there that might hurt somebody. So the intersection theory tries to investigate the impact of race, class, gender, socioeconomic status, for example, sexuality. How do those things all crisscross each other and either help a person or hurt a person in terms of how they progress in society? Then they talk a little bit about violence in relationships and the need for shelters. We have more pet shelters in this country than we do people shelters, which obviously is an issue. They talk about female genital mutilation in a little more detail. They talk about sexual harassment, of course. They talk about pornography. And again, as I said before, pornography is a slippery slope in that what might be pornographic to one person is not to another. But the whole idea is that there is this exploitation of this person and against their will. And so that is what makes it wrong. And obviously, it's something where sadly, a lot of young men in our culture today are more addicted to pornography than ever before and often have these unrealistic expectations of what sex is because of what they've seen, which is orchestrated and acted out and is not real. And so we really have some issues with young men these days not understanding the dynamics of sexuality and normal sexual relationships and behavior because of the influence of the pornography and the unrealistic expectations and the exploitation that happens primarily to women in these in this whole field, whether it be something that's written, video, whatever the case may be. Then the chapter finishes up with talking about theories. And so the structural functionalists would say, go look at a society and how they treat men and women in that society and the role that they play. And is that a part, kind of a function, part and parcel of how that group operates. And for many functionalists, women and men are like puzzle pieces where, he's bringing home the bacon and she cooks it up and takes care of the kids. And so they see it as a very complementary kind of joining of the two forces. Whereas a conflict theorist would come in and look at a society and say, do men have more money, status, and power, and how are women and children being treated? And that aligns very much with what the feminists would say in terms of how are women treated, how are they paid, what is their life like within that society. The symbolic interactionists would look at what they call the construction of reality. How do men and women treat each other? What did you learn in your home? That's why being engaged is such a good thing, because if you love somebody, go see what their parents are like. See if mom waits on dad 24/7. See what the dynamic is like in that parent couple, because that kid grew up with that. And that may be how they expect to fight or solve problems or be waited on or whatever the case may be. And so you can get a lot of insight into how a person expects to live their life as a married person just by watching their parents and seeing the love, respect, regard, cooperation, communication, control, competition, whatever it may be. Really take a look at those future in-laws, because that may be a part of the future of what you're facing unless you and your partner talk about it now and talk about how you see your development of your relationship as you go along. It can be very telling. So you really want to do that when you're engaged to somebody, and never assume that, they'll never be just like their parents. That's what they've known all of their lives. So our habits are pretty ingrained in the social world we grow up in. So you want to think about that. Now the feminists again, obviously over around page 330, depending on your book, they talk about some of the basic ideas related to feminism. And feminists are simply people who want equal rights and equal pay, an end to sexual harassment, reproductive rights, care for children. You can be a man and be a feminist, and you can even rise above that and everybody be a humanist and want good things for all people in humanity, for example. But you can be a feminist, and I'm very upset that there's a radio personality who for years made fun of feminists and still does, and calls them feminazis, which is just a horrible, horrible labeling of women who simply want equal pay and equal opportunity. And so being a feminist, whether you're a male or a female, is actually a very good thing in terms of wanting, those kinds of privileges in society. Now, you do, just like any other area, you have feminists who are more conservative and more moderate and more liberal and more radical. And so they talk about some of the different labels or kind of sub-camps that you can belong to. But the overall picture is that a woman be able to run her own life just as a man would. And that is not a bad goal, that everybody be equal. They also talk about multicultural and global feminism. And some of the opposition, especially in very conservative cultures, where they don't want women to have more rights and privileges, because that would upset the apple cart of that male patriarchal society. And then the last theory listed there is called the social exchange theory. And this is kind of an interesting theory in that it maintains that to a certain extent you don't get married for love, you get married for the best deal that you can make. It's almost like a game show, in that when you talk about finding that marriage partner, it's about what they can bring to the relationship and what you can bring to the relationship. So there's a social exchange, and you want to get the best bang for your buck. You want to get the best deal that you possibly can in terms of the partner. And then if you get married to that person and the relationship fails, then you dissolve that relationship and that union by getting a divorce, separation, breakup, whatever. But it's because in the social exchange that other person failed and did not do what you expected them to do. So it's kind of like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You, again, bring home the bacon, I'll fry it up for the kids. So it's something where it's built on this mutuality of sharing, not just love. It's about what can make you happy. And so it's kind of an interesting theory. Some people find it a little cynical. Other people see it extremely practical. And remember, love was not always an issue in relationships for many, many years, and for some people still is not today. Economics is a big part of it, and has been, especially for women who needed the comfort of a marriage that would provide economic security for her and her children. So that is the last part of the chapter on stratification. I'm going to load this up, and hopefully it's going to go through. And so I hope you enjoy these 3 chapters, because we're going to find that the dynamics of these chapters, especially the majority and minority, and how groups are influenced related to money, status, and power, are going to carry us through the rest of the book. So this stratification is a very huge part of American society, and as we move into the next chapter on race and ethnicity, we'll see the impact on that as it's layered with these other factors. Okay? So thank you very much for paying attention. Bye-bye.